Welcome, welcome, welcome to Susie Says. Today I am thrilled to welcome an extraordinary guest, Alex Thomas, a speaker, facilitator, consultant and social entrepreneur on a mission to plant seeds for safety across rural communities. Alex is the founder and chief planter of seeds of the Plant a Seed for Safety initiative, a rural social change movement dedicated to bringing people home to their loved ones by shifting how we think about health, safety and well-being on farms and in regional workplaces. Born and raised on a remote sheep station and inspired by her personal experience caring for a disabled dad, Alex has spent over 18 years in the work, health and safety, challenging the status quo of box-ticking bureaucracy and championing practical people-focused safety that truly saves lives. Welcome, Alex.
Hello, Susie. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me. For everyone, I met Alex through AgriFutures alumni and mutual connections, and I knew her mum still know her mum, and just love the work she's doing, love her energy. She's a real pocket rocket. So, Alex, you grew up on a remote sheep station. How did that environment shape your understanding of risk and responsibility, and how did that lead you to where you are now?
My God, Susie, it was the best childhood ever. I don't know how do you describe it to people that don't fully understand what it's like? I mean, it's just ultimate autonomy, I guess, freedom to go and do whatever you want to do within certain reasons and within certain boundaries. And I think it was really interesting growing up in that environment, doing school of the air, having complete free reign of the house paddock and being able to kind of disappear for hours at a time and then come back, for lunch or at the end of the day when the sun's about to go down. And then to sort of walk into mining some years later, which is just such an enormous contrast in the sense that it's heavily regulated, delineated, very big stick compliance orientated, don't step past the dotted line type stuff. And you lose your autonomy in that environment and you're expected to kind of conform to a certain way of being. And there's all sorts of crazy, weird and wonderful things that happen in that environment. But what I think my ultimate reckoning has been over the last 20 years as a safety consultant has been that if you take that away from people and you make them scared, they are never going to come to you, to tell you that they've made a mistake or they've hurt themselves or that they think something should be different and they're certainly not going to innovate things. And when you apply that sort of compliance-based box ticking, big stick approach from mining into an environment like agriculture or like a sheep station where people are expected to be autonomous and to take responsibility for themselves and to be able to manage risks, it's no surprise really that the whole industry's kind of gone, bugger this, I'm completely disinterested in this way of being. And in fact, what's interesting is when you actually do the thinking and invest the time in understanding what's coming out of the universities from a safety space, and this is the safety nerd hat creeping in here, mining is and other big industries are having to undo everything that they thought was the right way of doing things, when they started their safety journey. So my kind of mission through the work that I do is to completely sort of interject on this, because you can see those approaches bleeding into agriculture. And we've actually got this really cool opportunity to just do things really differently and honour the really great things that exist in ag around autonomy and making risk-adjusted decisions and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I love that because whilst I lived here on a sheep property for 20 years now, I wasn't born and bred up here, but my auntie and uncle lived not far from here, and I spent a lot of my childhood coming up here. And it's funny that you say that. I just loved the freedom. I loved the going and building cubbies under bushes and playing with lizards and just being yourself. And then you come back, and I often say this, when I first came here to live with Mick, I felt like I was home, and it was like home to me, So, and I find that interesting that you talk about the rules and regulations of mining, but that's creeping into farming, and that now obviously from a safety aspect, but how to manage that and massage that, using that identity or that who I am, and not taking back from the really greatness and the authenticity of living in life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is I think there's a lot of judgment and shame placed on industries like agriculture for not being safe enough. And yes, sure, there's examples of where things go wrong and it's terribly sad, but at its absolute core, nobody goes to work to hurt themselves or other people. Agriculture is extremely dynamic. It's not like we're all standing in a production line and doing the same thing day in, day out, or a manufacturing line. Sorry, that's probably a better example. And I think probably some of the greatest things about agriculture are, we work in the best environment in the world. We've got so much space and beautiful big skies and all the rest of it, but we work inside family businesses. So we're working with family and friends. I mean, you can't get a more innate sense of care for people than that. Whereas if you go and work in big industry, you're one of thousands of other people reporting to the same person at the top of the tree, and they don't know you. There's no relationship, and therefore there's no trust often. So they
You're
have a
just,
whole kettle of, sorry, what
you're
was
just
that?
another you're just another tax
Yeah.
file number. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. But, unfortunately, ag doesn't have an internal safety department to help sort of counter this push to be like mining. And we work in silos, unfortunately. So we don't have a unified voice and position, I guess, on safety as much as lots of very talented and well-intended people are trying in that regard. But yeah, I'd say power to agriculture and small family businesses because we're doing a lot more right than we probably think we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And well said. Alex, you've shared your story outside this podcast about, caring for your dad and how that experience influenced the way that you think about safety and care. So can you talk us through a little bit about your experience with that and how, that did influence you?
Yeah, for sure. So Dad's my best mate. Unfortunately, he passed away last year after a really, really long battle with lots of horrible, horrible chronic illnesses. So he was that iconic Aussie bushman. You can literally see the enormous bucket hat and the big elephant ear R.M. Williams jeans. I don't think they make them anymore, unfortunately. And he was, stoic bushman, never go to the doctor. And just worked flat out to the contrary of the advice of my mother and his mother and probably everybody else around him. Really part of that dying breed of country blokes, I guess. So he got Q fever in his early 30s, which is a livestock-borne bacteria that wreaks havoc. I'm sure your listeners probably know what that is, but it can cause a lot of damage to your organs and your immune system. Then he got Ross River virus, and this was all in the throes of the drought of 82, and then that was shortly followed by the drought of the 90s. And so consequently ended up with diabetes when he was about 38, I think it was, and then had to sell the station because we were in a perpetually dry, marginal part of South Australia up around Yunta. And, we're talking about a fifth generation land dweller here, like farmer. So there's a lot of very deeply ingrained pride in all of that. And so when he had to sell the place and then, mum and dad split up, and I think, the compounding impact of all of those things and just thrashing yourself for such a long time meant he later got kidney failure, heart failure, and he had 7 amputations before he passed away last year and spent the last 4.5 years on dialysis, which was a blessing and the most almighty curse. It's just a really, can I swear, really shitty thing to go through. Yes. Yeah, I know. Oh my God. But yeah, no, I guess he was just a salt of the earth, very practical, sensible individual. And in terms of how he influenced me, I guess my love for him sort of transcended into a broader love for just people in agriculture. And I could see how this compliance box ticking stuff was trying to bleed into ag, and could see his response, his reaction to that approach in mining when we were both up there working in Roxby. And you can imagine a bloke like him, his response to that approach. I mean, Dad wasn't a swearer, but I think there were plenty of 4-letter words uttered every time that. So anyway, yeah, so I guess that kind of, that he has always been a big part of the inspiration behind why I do what I do. But I guess now, and I mentioned this to you before, I'm going through the most perilous identity and career crisis of all time because he's freaking dead. And you know what? He died with my Planet Suit for Safety shirt on. And I remember, and so there's so many feelings and things that you go through when you lose your parent. But there was a symbology to that has really made me think, oh my God, what does this mean? Like, where am I? Like, what am I going to do next? And I think there's been a very I guess a logical transition that's sort of unfolding in front of me, given the behind the scenes journey with Dad and advocating for him and with him through the rural health system for 15 to 20 years. That makes me think that perhaps my efforts moving forwards might be better placed in that space, but I don't know yet. It's probably a little bit early to say, but it's also not too much of a pivot away from what I was kind of already doing. It's just through a bit of a different lens, I guess.
No, and it's all doors opening, and I understand that, and it's still so very raw for you. And I think, grief is, there's just so many layers to it, and there's no rhyme or reason, there's no hard and fast rules. So you have to go with it, which can be really frustrating. But, I still have both my parents with us. My father, we lost to dementia. He's still alive, but I feel like you lose them twice, because you lose the parent you know, and then but they're physically still there. So, um, I think for you, having, living there and working and caring with your dad and having this joint mission, so to speak, and then him wearing that, plant a seed for, say, top, it's a little bit like him, with the fifth generation. There's probably like a feeling of maybe there's a responsibility there, or this is a commitment. But also, I suppose what I'm getting to is, with grief, it is an identity crisis. You lose who you are. So for me, it was a child that you sort of go, well, I was always Muz's mum, so who am I? Who am I now? What is this? And I suppose for you, Alex, it was like, well, I was Dad's carer. I was his advocate. He was my best mate. So who is Alex now? Do you know what I mean? How,
Mm,
and you get into that role for so long. So of course you're in an identity crisis. That's just normal for what you're experiencing, So yeah.
it is, and it's interesting. Like, he was such an anchor point. Like, for everything plant a seed for safety orientated, particularly because, while I grew up on the station, I left the land when I was probably 20, little bit younger. So, I mean, it's in the blood, it's never going away. But, he's not there for me to pick up and call and go, if you were still on the land, what would you say to this? And it doesn't mean that I can't still, pivot off of our journey together. Probably what really transpired in the last sort of 6 months of the last probably 5 years of Dad's life, was just how profound the unique challenges are for people living rurally when it comes to getting the care that they need. And, there was this ultimatum. In fact, it happened twice, but there was this ultimatum from a metropolitan-based doctor to say, you've either got to turn the dialysis machine off and pass away, or move to Adelaide. And after, 15 years of me taking phone calls from unknown numbers and writing, well-constructed letters of feedback and suggestion to the health system to, listen to him, listen to us, please help us through this. I saw red. I've never had such a visceral, full body experience of anger like that. And anger's not, my sort of modus operandi, I guess. But, through the process of grieving him, even when he was alive, and he didn't have dementia, but just watching him slip, noticing how he would slow down and wouldn't take my phone calls anymore, or because he couldn't, because he was exhausted, and because his hands didn't,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. Anyway, so watching him slip away and then feeling this heat of just gross inequity, I guess, if I can use that, between the experiences that you would have if you were living in the city versus living in the country. It's grief, and that is just such an enormous catalyst. And
It is.
I didn't feel, for a lot of his journey, there were plenty of headbanging moments where I was like, oh my God, I just want to go to the media. This is ridiculous. But I didn't, out of respect for him, but also fear that it would compromise his care. So it's that empowering people to speak up about really tough, shitty stuff that
Not
I'm
being and not
just
being
got this,
penalised for it.
not being penalized for it. I've just got this fire in my belly. I just think, why? And it's no individual's fault, a lot of this stuff. We've been kind of
That's right.
suppressed by a system. Yeah, go on, Susie.
So
Sorry, I'm cutting you off.
no. I interrupt all the time, so that's right. I That's why it's called Susie Says Have a Good Listen, because growing up, my brother, everyone used to say, I spoke to Susie the other day, I had a good listen because they didn't get a word in. So, but tell me, like, I get this not so much with the health system, but I've over the years, say, it's a bad year. People don't understand that farmers usually only get paid twice a year, but a lot of people go, oh, well, they choose to live there. So, that's just your bad luck, so to speak. What would you say to that?
Thanks, mate. You're going to kick the hornet's nest now. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, people
it's a
people
disconnect.
don't
It's a
realise where their
disconnect.
food comes from, I think. I think they think it comes from the supermarket.
Yeah, they do. I mean, what I would say is that I mean, human beings, it's human nature to make assumptions about other people's experience and their choices and stuff like that. That's a very normal, natural thing. But I just think, through my career in safety, now into this rural health space, what it boils down to is a disconnect and, a lack of compassion through not understanding. And when fear plays such a big role in people speaking up and telling it how it is, we don't stand a hell of a lot of a chance of really moving forwards. Like the divide exists because of all of those things. I'm not being particularly articulate in saying this, but I guess what I really love doing more and more so is sitting in the messy middle between party A and party B and going, what's the story that's playing out underneath the surface here and how can we help bridge that? Because if it's a small family business that wants to do safety and they're scared of the regulator, then they pass that fear down to their people on the ground. And then the people on the ground don't speak up. And then there's a disjoint between the management and the people on the ground. And then if it's like the health system, it's the bureaucracy right at the top, it's so
Yeah.
multi-layered and it's
So
not
just
helpful,
on
is
that,
it?
2 questions there. So or a two-part question, what do leaders misunderstand about human behaviour when it comes to safety culture in rural areas? And on top of that, what do they understand the real cost emotionally or culturally when we don't talk about safety? Like what you were saying, it's that fear that comes down.
What do leaders misunderstand about what's happening on the ground? That was the first question, wasn't it?
Yeah, about human behaviour when it comes to safety culture and in particular rural areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is endemic everywhere, but I think history has taught us, particularly through World War Ones and Twos and whatever, that you'd have to take a command and control approach to trying to get people to fall into line, and that's a very directional, linear. You must do what I say way of doing things, and that is fine in an emergency situation. It might be fine in a military situation, but we exist in a very dynamic world, and to navigate really hairy, messy challenges, we need to have relationships with the people that we're working with. We need to have trust and we need to be willing to take people's feedback and suggestions on board and, pull through the messiness with a consensus-based approach to making decisions. And I know that all sounds very, hypothetical and conceptual and whatever. But at the end of the day, if your people are scared of you because you don't let them speak up or because you're assuming that your way is the only way or you're assuming that there is only one way of doing things, then they're just not going to tell you about the reality. And you're opening yourself up to be dreadfully exposed. And nobody, whether you're a leader or you're a person on the ground, nobody likes being told what to do. And everybody comes to work with the intention of doing a good job, mostly. And we make the assumption that people are going to deliberately hurt themselves or that they're deliberately going to bugger something up or they're going to deliberately sue the company, then, we creates divisiveness, creates fear, and that ultimately detracts us from getting runs on the ground.
Yeah. And I suppose then that leads into that second part of, that then affects the real costs emotionally and culturally when we don't talk about it. And I know in rural areas, communities, ours in particular, so it's interesting you talked about trust because, I was reading something, I think the other day, Brene Brown, and how she, the trust comes from the small little things. So that, then when something big happens, the leader comes in and says, trust me. And everyone goes, yep, I do, because they've built up that trust. It's not just coming in and demanding it. And I know, like when Nick was sick and he was hospitalised for 6 months and, the community, whether there were personality conflicts or differences, whatever, it doesn't matter. The rural communities just drop everything and they come together. And what you said about, it's my way or different ways, there's automatically a leader in that situation and everyone just falls into line. And they might go, well, there might be a different way, but they just fall into line and they get the job done and they support each other. So, yeah, I just, probably thinking out loud and talking out loud, but it's just an interesting conversation and how if you then start regulating going, well, you can't, if you need farmers to come in and help you in a situation like that, they've got to do a volunteer police check. They've got to do this. They've got to do that. I haven't got time to do that. So would that be, along those lines?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the fact that you have to get a clearance, like I understand the rationale behind getting clearances and things like that, but it is imposing I'm assuming you're a criminal and a bad person, you're going to do the wrong thing. Prove to me that you're not.
Yeah.
Which, again, I know is necessary, but it sends this message that I don't trust you. And not a lot of good stuff comes from that. I don't know what the alternative is, but it's I think, as you say, rural communities are notorious for just getting in and getting shit done.
Getting it done.
But the cool thing
Yeah.
about them, and yes, there are natural leaders and that's important. But I think probably what exists within rural communities that maybe doesn't exist to the same degree in towns, if I can make a comparison here, is that everybody knows everyone. You go to the supermarket, there's no such thing as anonymity, mate. If you haven't brushed your hair, bad luck. Someone's going to see you. But it creates a degree of transparency and authenticity and trust. And it just means that we are, we're very well positioned to be able to band together and get stuff done. Whereas there's a higher degree of suspicion, I think. And, people don't know each other's neighbours, stuff in town. And I think that, makes it actually quite isolating when you live
Yeah.
in the city.
Absolutely, well said. Alex, the plant a seed for safety is such a powerful phrase. What does that actually really mean to you?
What does plant a seed for safety mean? Look, I think it's really about acknowledging that change is really difficult for people. It requires, an investment in mental energy. And, like if anyone listening has ever tried to give up smoking or give up some kind of habit, I mean, it is usually it's quite a protracted journey of thinking and rethinking and trying and failing and trying again. And so if you go into a workplace, you've never worked there before and you've done something a certain way for 35 years in another workplace, and then someone slaps a policy in front of you and says, this is how we do things here, now do it. It doesn't really acknowledge human nature and how challenging that can be. So I think planting a seed for safety is about honouring that people are not difficult, people are people, not blaming them for their messiness and just, oh my God, I'm such a bloody word salad today. I'm sorry. I haven't done a podcast for ages
Yeah,
and I'm
right. You're
anyway.
doing awesome. It's great.
But I think, there are so many different ways of influencing change. Women are particularly fabulous at it. And almost always is it nothing to do with just rocking up and saying, do this because I said so, or do this because it's a rule. It's asking a really good question. It's picking the timing around when you have a conversation about something that's hard. It's making sure that you've put things in place to make the new or harder thing as easy as it possibly can be. And it's about acknowledging that it might not happen overnight, but you've got to take people on a journey to get to that point, I guess.
So with that, resistance in the rural communities, that is the start for you of breaking through that resistance? Just those small...
I think, yeah, I think so. Like it's about not making assumptions around what's going to be right for another person or what their life experience has been. It's about just leaning into humility and asking a question and planting a seed, making a suggestion rather than coming in guns blazing and saying, there's a finite black and white way of doing this and that's the only way. And I think, unfortunately, regulators make that mistake a lot of the time. They assume that they know better and more about the reality of a workplace and safety in that workplace without actually having a conversation and trying to understand what that looks like. So leading with humility and compassion and curiosity, I guess, is what Plant a Seed for Safety is all about.
Yeah, Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. This episode is proudly supported by Workbench for the Mind, a practical mental fitness program created by me, Susie Evans. Workbench for the Mind is for anyone who feels overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure what to do next, but isn't ready for therapy or doesn't know where to start. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about learning simple, evidence-based tools to understand your thoughts, emotions, and behaviours and putting them somewhere you can actually reach when life gets hard. Think of it as the bridge between I'm fine and professional support. With guidance, structure, and care along the way, you can learn more or join a supported intake at susieevans.com.
Hmm.
So if Australia truly embraced a culture of care and safety, what would look different in 5 years in your eyes?
If Australia truly embraced a culture of health and
Care
safety,
and safety. Yeah, health and
care
safety.
and safety,
Yeah,
I think it would be more open and honest conversations about what works and spreading good news stories rather than spreading fear and talking about people dying all the time. I think it would be empowering minorities and the people that aren't in leadership positions to be the bulk of that conversation and to inform what things look like rather than the minority, the people in the leadership positions assuming to know better than everybody else. And I think that ultimately it would look like, you know, better relationships, more trusting relationships, more transparency between people, no matter where you exist within the ecosystem, um, and therefore better outcomes. I mean, it's not. We often talk about, and I'm not even going to go there. That's not helpful. But yeah, I think that's what it would look like. But I think the go-to for agriculture or for any industry is to be like, how many people did we kill this year, right?
right,
That's
yeah.
the sad reality of trying to measure success. What about maybe a flip of that is how many people didn't get injured or killed this year compared to how many man and woman hours we do, like the sheer volume plus the environment that we're working in and just how dangerous and complicated and ever changing it is. We're actually doing pretty damn well. So let's tell a good news story and see that
Absolutely.
rather than,
I
thriving off
totally
the
agree.
negativity.
And I think people underestimate that majority of farmers grow up with a lot of common sense, as in with farming. I know one local, mixed cousins here, their kids, they're all boys, and they grew up, they never had toy tools. They were taught
Mhm.
from 2, 3 how to treat the
Wow.
tools and what they could touch and what they couldn't. And I thought that was brilliant because, and I think if you think about that, I don't know if it was the intent from the parents, but if you actually think of that from a safety point of view, if there's a toy and they're doing it and the next thing they find themselves in the shed and see a real
Mm.
one, that would be more dangerous. Whereas they're actually taught how to respect the tool, the real tool and what they're used for. And I say this in the mental fitness space that I do too, that farmers are often seen as not very intelligent.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's right, but they're most intelligent people I know about day-to-day common sense and those safety things to look out for. So yeah, I think in the mental health space too, we talk about people with mental illness. We don't talk about the people that cope. It's the smaller percentage. And I love that you say we need to some of the good stories of, this farm's been for 20 years accident free or incident free, those sorts of things, as opposed to this year we lost 5 people, and so I don't think people actually understand how dangerous a lot of the work is,
Mm.
and putting the red tape of forms and different things isn't actually perhaps always going to protect that from happening, if that makes sense.
Well,
I'm not sure.
totally. Oh, no, it does. I mean, I just think how disempowering if all we're saying to farmers is you're dumb, you're dangerous, you don't know what you're doing, and we know better. Like that's the long and short of what this kind of hierarchical, compliance-based, paperwork-driven approach to safety does to people. And so it's no wonder that we stick our heads in the sand and go, bugger it, I'm not going to touch this. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't add any value. And, to your point, like, far out. I'd love to see some of those people in a farming environment, see how that goes. Farmers are some of
Okay.
the most cleverest, most innovative people, most resilient,
Humble. They're
active, humble.
yeah,
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 absolutely. And there's so much stuff they're getting right. Like, and we focus on, oh, you didn't wear a hard hat. Well, there's actually no risk of something falling on my head. But anyway, like we focus on that stuff. What about the fact that I completely just re-engineered the sheep yards to make the sheep run well, and I built these gates so that they don't actually swing back on, whatever. It's
yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah, yeah.
en- and engineering bloody geniuses, and we don't imagine what the industry would look like if we shared those ideas that obviously keep people safe, but obviously make things more productive. It would just completely flip the narrative, I think.
Absolutely. And Alex, how many, and your dad would have been like this, how many
Mm.
rural farmers that are self-taught,
Yeah,
that's self-taught. I know
yeah.
women that have taught themselves to tile bathrooms because it was the only way that was going to happen. There's so many farmers that are, as you said, really clever at engineering and welding and doing amazing stuff, but they don't have the ticket. So, therefore, yeah. And it's again on the mental health. I know with my grief, when I couldn't get out of bed, and Mick did all the practical things. He might not have used the same language as a psychologist and that, but he did all the things because farmers know about life and death from a very young age with dealing with stock. I know it's different when it's a person, but it, they still have to when you have farmers that have to shoot stock, in a drought or, those sorts of things, there is still a huge emotional connection there. So, I think, yeah, I think it's just probably not the answers, but it's interesting, and I really love how you're bringing the conversation forward that you make it because you can't those cliches, you can't fix the problem with the same mindset that created it. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
we need
yeah,
we need those conversations to and I think your anger is not a bad thing. I think your anger is great because it's you're starting to go into fight flight. You're going, we need that frustration, and it needs that. And that's where the leaders and the
mm,
city people need to understand we're not a different race of people or a different. We matter and we matter, and so we shouldn't be
I know.
penalised for where we live.
Absolutely. And I think we have got this, don't put your head above the parapet, sit down, shut up, and get on with it. Very humble, it is what it is mentality. And I think anger has traditionally been framed as an unhelpful emotion, and it can be, but it's also very useful. And,
It's not the emotion that's bad. It's not anger. The emotion
no,
of anger is bad. It's how we behave to that emotion. So if we
absolutely.
lean into that emotion and understand it, then we can manage our behavior more effective to it because it's not the anger that's bad. It's the behavior to that.
Absolutely. It's where you put it and how you channel it into something useful or not useful. But it's just, I thought for so long I thought that the boogie monster was going to jump out from behind a corner and get me if I spoke up about something. And, I think women are particularly good at, conforming with the good girl narrative and not expressing anger at all, actually. But it's amazing. It can be absolutely amazing. And to be quite frank with you, I don't want to be divisive or for people to be angry, but I think we've got to get it out of our bodies. Like we have to for the better of
It's that,
ourselves as an individual and society.
yeah, and we've got
Sorry?
to work together. We have to work together.
Mm,
It's a combined community, and change creates fear. That's a natural emotion with that. So, it's that conversation, it's the anger and frustration that no one's listening. I think that's the thing, and that they're not coming up with a solution. It's always about, oh, we've done this or we've done that and it hasn't worked. It's like, well, then try something else, or you know, let's have a proper conversation about it and make the changes that are going to make an absolute difference, which is what you're doing.
totally. I'm giving it a red hot crack.
Yes,
Yeah, but I think
yeah,
you just I think if people are angry, I mean, it's a normal part of the human experience, isn't it? Like you've got to hold space
absolutely.
for that, and I think we don't do that. And when bigger organisations consult in inverted commas with rural communities about change, and they don't hold space for whatever comes up, that's when it simmers and it turns into division, and that's when change is especially difficult, I reckon.
Yeah,
Yeah, so relationship buildings I think are critical is critical in all of that.
yeah. And that leading into that, it's whether it's rural or city or whatever in life, it's all relevant. So, what would be one small seed that someone listening today, either in rural or city, could plant immediately in their workplace or family that could genuinely, help, save a life, I suppose, or,
Hmm.
just make that change?
Yeah. Okay. So I would firstly, as a bit of a primer, I would say acknowledge the fact that there is not one line in current work health and safety law that says you need a documented policy or procedure. I would also acknowledge that the corporate approach to safety does not apply for a small family business. And the moment you assume that it might, you're giving your power away to something that is not going to generate safer outcomes. And then as in terms of planting a seed that could actually save someone's life, I would ask yourself and or the people around you, what could kill someone here right now? How could that happen? And what are we going to do about it? What could kill someone? How? And what are we going to do about it? And use those three questions to help anticipate what could go wrong and stop it
Yeah, love
wherever
that.
and whatever you're doing.
And that's coming from that, yeah, don't just say it happened, acknowledge it and assess it and then do something, actually do the action to prevent it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Because no policy or procedure or record or high vis vest is going to stop someone from making a choice to step over an exposed PTO or take a guard off something and stick their hand in there while it's still operating. Like we just, yeah, it's a conversation, and it's about having the awareness and the sense to just stop and think before you do something.
No, I love that. Thank you. Alex, what
That's okay.
legacy do you hope your work leaves behind?
Such a great question. I hope that rural people in rural communities know and understand and feel that they and their health and safety matters. Like, I can't make any broad sweeping claims that I want to reduce the number of people who are in agriculture because I have no control over that. But I really want people in rural communities to know that they and their health and safety matters.
Yeah, what a beautiful legacy. What an amazing, I think your dad would be incredibly proud of what you're doing. And it's still very early days for you. And it's been a traumatic event. And I think I
Mm.
understand to throw yourself into something is actually really powerful, A, for yourself and B, for those around you. And I think, for me, my four whys and tick my boxes in my life at the moment is one, it helps me. Two, it helps others. Three, as a female, I'm financially independent. And four, it leaves a legacy for my son. And I think all those four things, you are ticking those boxes, Alex Thomas, even if you see it. You can be proud of yourself because we all are and are in your space. You're just amazing.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before to anyone or share? How can people find out more about Plant a Seed?
So if you go to plantaseedforsafety.com, you should get a fairly good idea of what it's all about. It's there to make rural safety down to earth, doable, and fun. So it's all that inspiring, juicy, sharing good stories stuff. I do lots of workshops and lots of public speaking and things like that. Otherwise, if you just Google Alex Thomas, God, that sounds so arrogant, doesn't it? Not meant to be arrogant, but there's plenty of stuff.
And we'll put the links in for people to find you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. It's been a delight. I could sit here and talk for hours with you, and maybe we'll check in with you a bit later, but I wish you all the best and keep doing what you're doing and keep being you. You're amazing.
Thanks, mate. So good to chat. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.